right, I need to turn this off. Okay, so I'm going to give some quick updates. I'm going to update you on the grant that we just put in. I'm going to update you on the goals, sort of statewide versus regional versus the theme goals. Update you on the schedule. And then I just want to go back to sort of like why we are doing this and why we're doing it kind of the way that we are. So this is the grant that the state of Alaska just put in for. They put it in through the National Park Service. The state has $200,000 available and can get up to $200,000 from the NPS. We put this in last week. I put a message into Matt Lawson, who's the NPS person doing this, to see where it's at. It has to be done by the fiscal year, so we will know before October 1st if we're going to get it or not. We changed a lot of this. They didn't like the way we had done it the first time. And the main things that we're asking for are things that only can inform the SCORP. So we're asking for a couple planners to help write this thing, surveys that will possibly be done by Ivan Moore here locally, asking for $35,000 for that. GIS maps, Ricky has talked about this a lot, like hotspot maps, really trying to identify existing supply of outdoor rec, where it's at and how it's kind of used. And then I'm pretty excited about the possibility of mobile phone data, which we've been talking with RRC associates. They showed us some really powerful tools that you can get polygons of all the parks, our state parks, our national parks, and start to find out who's visiting, when they're visiting, and it has lots of data. You don't have the person's personal data, but you have a lot of data about them. So it's kind of scary, but really good information. So we're not going to go over this today, but I just wanted to share that we have goals at the statewide level. Each one of the themes has goals, and now each region has started to develop goals. So we want to make sure that we're not saying the same thing over and over again. And so we're starting to look at different goals from different regions to start to maybe get some wording to make them all the same. We don't want to take away from anything, but we also don't want to have the same goal over and over and over again throughout the document. So know that that is going on, and we'll probably talk about it more. We don't want to take away from anything, but we also want to try to standardize it as much as possible. And this just shows that at the top, we started some. I tried to color code them that were the same. So just so folks know that that's going on. This is the current schedule, and you can see that we've reached this section right here. So we've identified the open selection process, the old one, and hopefully what the new one will look like. And I'm in the process of writing that a little bit more specific. We have about 10 criteria or so, but we want to like lay that out a lot better. And I'm pretty sure that will be a topic at the next SWAG meetings, trying to get some input on that. We've done a lot of this research and outreach over the spring and summer. And we hope in November that we start to get all the committees and regions to turn in their templates. And then over the next 2 or 3 months, we'll start to write those out and start to share them with the public and get even more info. So that's where we're at. So this sort of why we're doing it and why we're doing it with this approach. So of course we need to do the SCORP for the eligibility of federal dollars. We want to change the open selection process. I'll show you next month the current one. It's not very equitable at all. So we really want to focus on the equity part and make sure that anybody in the state can get LWCF or RTP funds. We actually want to be comprehensive. So the rest of the lower 48 is not comprehensive anymore. They write super vague documents. Well, way back when they were growing as we are now, it used to be very specific. And so there's examples on the East Coast where they wrote a plan, the SCORP, for just a whole regional park. We kind of feel, the team of Ricky Geese, myself, and Chris Beck, feel like we still are a young state and we're lacking a lot of that infrastructure. And so we want to be a little bit more comprehensive while trying to meet the equity part that I talked about earlier. But I really believe the equity part is going to be done through the open selection process and in the way that the ORTAB chooses projects for funding. And then advocacy, right? So when Alaska Trails wrote the Alaska Trails Initiative with a whole bunch of partners, we found out that, you know, documents can be pretty powerful if they have good projects in them with good public engagement. And, you know, those 13 or so projects that got into the state budget and then possibly in a GO bond, that's what we want this product to be used for as well. So you can ask questions about that. If you got thoughts about anything I just said, please put those in the chat and we'll try to get them during our discussion points. We have 14 total updates, so please keep your update to under 5 minutes. Use the chat to make suggestions and ask questions, and we'll have discussion at the end of the statewide and then at the end of the regional presentations. And so just take a look at the schedule here. So Sydney, you're up first, and then it's Lee Hart, Chris Beck with funding, either Dana or Don. Spelled your name wrong again, Don, I'm sorry. Either Dana or Don for public health and wellness, and then I'll do Alaska quality of life and conservation and stewardship. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Michael. I'm impressed at how fast you moved through all of that. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Sydney Filkey, and I'm the Regional Wetlands Coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I just kind of wanted to give an overview of where we're at with the wetlands section. And so folks are probably quite familiar with the fact that the Land and Water Conservation Funds basically requires that the SCORP specifically cover the importance of wetlands to the state's recreation resources. And so in the past, it seems that the Fish and Wildlife Service has basically provided an update on what is the wetland mapping status of the state. I think that's still a really important and valuable piece of information for us to cover, especially given the momentum behind the National Wetlands Inventory program right now. And so, you know, I'm trying to capture that information in terms of the write-up on the wetlands section and let folks know that, you know, Alaska is the only state without a complete national wetlands inventory. That's important information because if we're trying to bolster completing mapping in Alaska and using justification from a variety of different resources, we want folks to know, you know, Alaska's lacking. So, but also recognizing, like I said, the momentum that has been coming to mapping in Alaska recently. So through the Alaska Geospatial Council and the Alaska Mapping Executive Committee, we've established these baseline geospatial data sets of imagery and elevation that are the foundation to wetlands mapping. And so this graphic on the screen represents the existing data that was primarily produced in the 1990s in dark gray, and our current mapping projects which are in bright green on the map right now. If I were to have this map overlaying with land ownership, those light gray areas where we don't have current projects in existence and no funding for projects moving forward, those predominantly represent state land, national wildlife refuges, and Park Service land. So we are working closely with NPS and Fish and Wildlife Service and the state, trying to come up with how do we get those areas mapped. The other thing that I'm trying to do in this wetland section is really try to tie back the benefits of wetlands specifically to the importance of outdoor recreation. So how do these benefits of wetlands that often are talked really in ecological terms actually tie back to like the social sciences? So, you know, public health, how are wetlands affecting that? And so, you know, there's just this kind of filter system is commonly discussed. And so highlighting that, but then really diving a little bit more into the importance of wetlands for conservation, stewardship, and quality of life from a recreation perspective, tying that back also to subsistence activities. So berries, hunting, fishing, things that really support communities in Alaska, making sure that we capture that. And then also adding in this concept of economic and workforce development. Healthy wetlands give us healthy industries. And so not only are they supporting our recreation, but also especially our commercial fishing industries, which are huge economic drivers in Alaska. So trying to make sure that we're taking an approach in this wetlands section that doesn't just check the box for providing a wetlands section, but also truly trying to dive into some of the details of why wetlands are really important in Alaska and why we need to know the type and the location of wetlands through projects like the National Wetlands Inventory to support outdoor recreation planning in Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. Okay, Lee Hart. Unmute, Lee.
I am. I'm getting my screen all set up. And yep, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, great. So yeah, so on the Economic and Workforce Development Subcommittee, what I've done in part in response to a EDA, American Rescue Plan Act, Build Back Better Regional Challenge Grant opportunity is convene a workforce development task force or working group. And that is comprised of, led by Ryan O'Shaughnessy and Carolyn Alwater from Juneau Trail Mix and Ben Huey from Sitka Trail Works. Those two organizations were two of the three that had CARES Act programming last year for dedicated to creating local conservation corps. Juneau Trail Mix then took the success of their program and parlayed it into approaching the legislature to create a statewide CCC style program. So clearly these groups have devoted hundreds, if not thousands of hours to deep study about this. They have made amazing progress in conversations with the University of Alaska to develop the programming that would support a trail certification program that is equitable, inclusive, and provides a more skilled workforce that will help us accelerate the pace at which our infrastructure is built and maintained. So along with that grant, there is still more work to do that will emerge as some of the economic development piece by talking with some of our stakeholder industry private investment partners, and there'll be more on that later. But right now, the workforce development development program is sounds pretty redundant, is going along just amazingly well. I should point out too that that the team brought in Spruce Root, Laurel Stark from the SSP network in Southeast, and the Tlingit and Haida Central Council that's taken over a lot of the trail development work, workforce work down in Southeast. And so that's pretty exciting stuff to have such a diverse partnership.
Thanks. If I could, Mike, I'd share screen and pull up the image that I've got here. Is that showing up? Are people seeing that?
Yes.
Great, thanks. So the funding process, I think, keeps coming back as maybe even the center of the bullseye on this whole SCORP effort. So I got a handful of slides, but I'm going to hit my 5-minute start here and make sure I don't go past that. There's been a whole lot of thinking. It seems like every dimension of so many discussions about recreation come back to funding. So I tried to summarize a couple of the big themes that keeps coming up. Clearly, hundreds of millions of dollars are needed, and we're not coming close to that in sustainable revenue or one-time revenue. The continued problem of not having connections between outdoor recreation demand and revenue to meet that demand, our sort of reoccurring tendency in Alaska to feel like we can't afford anything, and so we can't invest, we can't take advantage of our opportunities. And then the final piece is these three big categories of needs that emerged from all of our meetings last spring. One came forward that we really didn't have on the list originally, which is getting projects to shovel ready. You need money to raise money. Construction, and then hiding on my screen share view is operations and maintenance. Volunteers are great, but it's hard to really do what's needed with just volunteer work. So there's a chapter in process on this. It's got those three categories that were on the previous slide. And what I want to do is just touch quick overflight on a handful of these, but not all of them. So the first two, just the headlines there, is in order to try to convince folks who have influence on for how much money is available, we need a good story. And then really the right messengers is a big part of that. We've been sharing a lot of that information, and it hasn't necessarily fully turned the tide on opening more funds to operate, to maintain, to build out the recreation infrastructure. So the one that's kind of gets to the meat of the subject is secure, sustainable, expanded outdoor recreation funding. We've got the A through G on that list, and you can see them there. I'm going to dive into the first three, but right projects, taking advantage of one-time federal funds, reliance on in-state funding, this disconnect that I mentioned, health funding, public-private partnerships, sponsorships by corporation, and what Lee was starting to talk about, but it's part of this solution is a skilled workforce, more extensive volunteer networks. So right projects, a lot of dimensions of that. Long Trail, I think, is a good illustration of the fact that when you have projects that people like, it generates support. It was not the last few yards were not achieved, but have the whole legislature come forward and include $13.2 million for the Long Trail was an amazing accomplishment. So looking for projects that are really popular, that residents like, that visitors like, that suggest that it will open the door for private investment. That's one of the categories, one of the ways of thinking about all this. This long list I won't begin to read, but we clearly want to maximize the use of established and one-time federal funds. And you can see there's a bunch in play. Some are in hand annually and expected. Particular accomplishment was having the Land Water Conservation Fund dollars that were being missed be included by the legislature this year. So that was a great deal. We've got this $1.1 trillion federal infrastructure bill coming forward, and a chance to take advantage of that. So the last of the three I was going to highlight is this notion of at the beginning of this set of slides about capacity building. It's amazing how much demand is exceeding capacity already. And that's without a full cruise season or without, in the Fairbanks to Seward corridor, the addition of the 3 new ship capacity that will show up in Seward in the next several years. So a list on there with my remaining 54 seconds of trying to invest in infrastructure that sets the stage for more revenue generation. A lot of the cars that are parked in these pictures are not paying fees because they're not in the lots, because the lots are full up. Putting in more sophisticated ways to get money, electronic fee stations. Looking into at the bottom of this list here of some form of sustainable, I jumped ahead, statewide funding is a goal. So, and then local sales tax, local general obligation bonds, but selling those things all come back to the group has been thinking, and I think it makes a lot of sense, to doing what this slide says. We've got to pull these facts together that tell the story. We have the right messengers, and then have some practical ways to raise those funds. So the funding group will continue to meet. We'll get together here in the next month and solidify the material that I'm summarizing. That's it. I'm going to hit stop share.
Okay, I think I'm next.
Okay.
Let me get my presentation up. So for those of you that I don't know, my name's Dana Deal. I work for the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and I helped facilitate the Public Health and Wellness Committee for SCORP. Michael, can you see my notes, or is it coming through as just the?
I can see Public Health and Wellness Committee SCORP planning update.
Okay, perfect. So before I talk about our progress, I wanted just to recognize the members on this committee, especially Lizzie and Miriam, who helped with taking notes throughout the process. The committee met 3 different times since May, and we have a really great group of people from diverse backgrounds. We've got a landscape architecture, Melissa on our team. We've got folks from public health at the state, tribal health, and then even the schools and trails that are representing the committee. So just a big shout out and thank you to all the folks that were able to participate in each of the planning committee meetings since May. So before we actually talked about developing our goals and strategies, we looked at a few different documents to help inform our work. One was Healthy Alaskans, which is a statewide health improvement plan that already has goals and strategies outlined for some of the priority health areas within Alaska. And then we also looked at a public health infrastructure assessment that was done a couple of years ago. And then we looked at some of the other outdoor recreation plans from other states. So taking that information and everything we know about just public health and wellness in Alaska, we came up with 8 overarching goals. And so I'll just run through these real quickly and give you an example of some of the strategies that we have under each of these goals. So the first one was that everyone in Alaska has access to enjoyable, safe outdoor recreation opportunities as an integral part of their daily life. And so an example of a strategy for that one was to look at transportation and reducing the transportation barriers for people to really have equal access to outdoor rec. The second overarching goal was increasing information about outdoor rec opportunities to ensure that they're accessible, easy to use, and widely distributed. So one of the strategies we talked about was more information that's clear, like map, signage, and even some web-based information that could be developed, especially to increase outreach to underserved populations. The third overarching goal was to increase youth participation in outdoor rec. And we talked about, as a strategy here, developing partnerships with programs that already have like youth wellness initiatives. For instance, there's a whole bunch of funding from the marijuana tax, and they've got an after-school program. So partnering with youth-focused programs that already do this work was a strategy. The fourth overarching goal for our group was to increase physical activity among Alaskans, specifically by promoting outdoor recreation. And one of the strategies here was to increase collaborations with healthcare and community service organizations to promote outdoor rec. And then the fifth overarching goal was to support connections between both public health and outdoor recreation by expanding partnerships and funding opportunities. So a lot of this kind of aligns with what Chris had shared regarding funding priorities. The sixth overarching goal from our team was to focus on the integration of culture, heritage, and art into outdoor recreation experiences. So that could be a strategy around increasing place names and signage that recognize the Indigenous people of the lands where outdoor rec sites exist. Our seventh goal was to promote outdoor rec as a safe physical activity, especially throughout the pandemic. We didn't get to creating a strategy for this one, but we felt like it was important to address how outdoor rec is really a safe physical activity when we're experiencing something like a pandemic. Our eighth goal was to better understand and address health and community wellness inequities related to outdoor recreation in the state of Alaska. And so we talked a lot about like looking at the data, like how do we even identify who's using our outdoor recreation sites and where are the gaps? And then the ninth goal was around expanding equity, diversity, and inclusiveness of outdoor recreation facilities and programs. And for a strategy, we talked about ensuring that equitable geographic distribution of OR investments exists specifically in rural areas. So those are the 8 or 9 overarching goals that we came up with. And then we've got strategies under each, but I didn't want to go through those because we just don't have time today. So that's the Public Health and Wellness Committee. Happy to take questions, comments.
You're on mute, Michael.
Thank you. So our last theme is quality of life or Alaska heritage. And this is just all the cool things in outdoor rec, right? This is all the stuff that we want to do. So we want better maintenance. We want diverse recreation opportunities. As Dana just said, integrate heritage and culture, arts into our outdoor rec experience, continued access for abundant subsistence resources, talk about the missing middle, better access, roadside rest stops, trailheads that Ricky has been pounding on a lot, better outdoor recreation wayfinding and information. Hopefully this grant allows us to get some maps for the state and just more incentives to stay that one more day that Chris Beck always talks about. So the quality of life did not get a committee yet, but we have a lot of, I think we have some good goals already and are starting to work on some strategies. So this was the Conservation and Stewardship Committee. And I was going to throw out to the group, do we need a conservation and stewardship theme or pillar in this 5-year SCORP? And one of the reasons I say that is the goals that we did have were only a few, and stewardship was sort of throughout all of the other themes. They talked about it several times. And so worth a discussion if conservation needs to be a theme this year. I think we were trying to follow sort of the four pillars of the SVGA, or I can't remember exactly what it was, the Concord's pillars or something, but I'm just not sure conservation is something that we need to put a whole lot of effort in right now, but definitely more conversation. So with that, I will stop sharing, and we have about 15 minutes for discussion. About 20 minutes for discussion. So raise your hand or jump in.
Hey, Mike, I'll jump in. I just want to say thanks to everybody for meeting over the course of the summer. And I think that the groups are doing well in establishing goals and strategies. This is nice coming together. We did get our grant in for the SCORP. That's, as Mike was saying, we'll find out by the end of this month what our status is on that. We heard back from the National Park Service also. Our extension likely we'll hear back in the first week or so of October of getting the SCORP, the current SCORP extended through 2022, and that'll put us on timeline to finish this process up in the fall of 2022. So we'll get started in 23, and this will take us through 27. So really appreciate everybody pitching in, especially we've just heard the statewide stuff, but I also know that the regional groups have been working really hard on a very similar timeline and tracking. So just want to say thanks to everybody.
Thanks, Ricky. Anybody else? Thoughts? Miriam, was there any questions or anything in the chat?
Maybe I'd lead in just with a question to the group. I flew pretty fast through the big, critical, complicated subject of funding, and I'm just curious if people find themselves thinking, okay, was that on target? Or maybe even more direct question, what do people think is the one or two most important things we collectively could do through this process to increase the funding that we have for all the investments we'd love to be making and the maintenance and the operations of all those facilities that are there now or that we hope to get built in the future. I can't believe some folks don't have some good ideas on that subject.
I see a Lee Hart hand. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, I got to reinforce that we need to get our sector to get in the habit of measuring economic impacts from their various projects and be having those quantifiable to be able to share both with their local elected leaders as well as us to aggregate for our state elected leaders when we start to talk about why it's important to invest. I think that's more important, that the story and who tells it is it needs to come from, you know, the communities themselves and why they feel it's important.
Thanks, Lee.
Michael, I was just going to add that our group talked a lot about just the need for better data to identify who's using and who's not using our outdoor rec sites. Because if we're thinking about equity, we really need to start with like looking at the data. Are we unintentionally not making these opportunities available to specific population groups? So if we had to prioritize some funding, from my perspective, one of those activities would be dedicating investments into gathering better data.
So Dana, if we get this grant and mobile phone data as part of that, we'll pull you back into the conversation to think about how, you know, how we might use that to find out some of those things.
That'd be
Anybody
great.
else?
Thanks.
All right, well, we can jump into the regional stuff and then we'll just have more time at the end and maybe some more thoughts will jump in everybody's head. It is Monday.
Oops. Hey, Mike, I just want to pop in to Dana's question about data and demographic data. One of the interesting things for these smartphone data is most people have them. Most people share their geologic location services, at least with one app on their phone. All that gets uploaded. And then this data then also merges with the census data. And now that the census, the 2020 census is done and complete, we're going to have two sets of data patterns, one from the 2010s, pre and post COVID, and then also now being able to integrate the 2020 census data. And all that census data does incorporate demographic data. And so this is why it's such a rich data set and why we're prioritizing it as the data set that we're going to look at to get the demographics.
All right, so we'll share. So Mr. Beck, you are up first. So this is a left to right. So Anchorage will be first, Mat-Su, the Kenai, Southeast, Prince William Sound, Denali, Fairbanks, and then rural Alaska. So I will give it over to Chris Beck.
Thanks, Mike. So there was a really helpful meeting. This goes to the first on that list, bring together key implementors. Last a week ago today, there was a meeting with the folks who are listed here. And this isn't to say that other voices aren't really important to the process, but it was helpful to bring together the folks who are most directly involved with the whole process of delivering on all these outdoor recreation goals, who maybe in contrast to some other communities have tended to not work together as closely. So I had a good discussion, and some of them what is on the rest of this list comes out of the thinking of that group about where the most traction can be gained. The picture on the right, the upper right-hand side, is one of many days where the capacity of today's infrastructure is just not keeping up, or even really coming very close to keeping up with the existing demand. And I think there's still some questions, will this surge of activity continue on the other side of, post-COVID, et cetera? I think there's no doubt that we are under capacity as a state and things are going to grow. So adding to that to meet demand, to anticipate the growing demand, and a detail, the little fourth bullet under number 2 that keeps coming up from the municipality and other folks is the real interest in having places you can stop along a trail for beverage, for comfort, for lodging. A funding issue, number 3 on that list. It's somewhat obscure and technical, but it's incredibly critical. There's an existing recreation service area in Anchorage. It does not take in the upper hillside where much of the recreation activity takes place. That leaves this unhelpful void in who's responsible for improving, maintaining, managing, etc. Goal number 4 that's particularly important to the Park Foundation is, and they're making a lot of progress, is more in town to really have inclusive parks and sports fields that welcome a really broad array of types of users, including the folks who may tend to not be feeling like they're as invited to outdoor recreation opportunities. A big theme is number 5, how can we really take even more advantage than we are today of our existing resources through better wayfinding and marketing? A detail on the wayfinding, it's really amazingly costly to put in signs around Alaska. And it'd be interesting for the SCORP to look into maybe some economies of scale statewide in signage. We spend a lot of money to businesses outside the state. Incorporating indigenous place names, I think, is a big theme statewide and part of that 5th goal. And then the last one on the list is on the long subject of how you grow the local economy, how you attract and retain a skilled workforce, is trying to be honest about focusing on truly world-class opportunities. And that could be the difference between people coming here, going someplace else. It's a picture of Connect Glacier on the right-hand side there, an amazing place that is growing rapidly in use, but is not really well understood, not widely marketed. Fixing up downtown, lots of interest by the partners on this list. And then to that picture again is let's see how we can make Anchorage more than a 100-day destination. So those are some of the highlights. There's an active group that's this core group that's at the top of the list, and then a much larger group that's been really involved in the process. So thanks to them for their efforts, and we'll keep working. And Mike will keep us on track to do a draft by the end of October.
All right. Let's see, who is this? Oh, I think I will stop. And I think, Wes, you had a slide share?
I do, Mike. Can I share now?
Yes.
Looks like it. Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Wes Hopkins, ED with the Matsu Trails and Parks Foundation, and I'm the regional coordinator working with folks from Alaska State Parks and the Matsu Borough in our slice of the project. Just picking it back up after a summer hiatus. We had 2 meetings in April and May, one during the Trails Conference as the other regions did, and then we had a follow-up stakeholder meeting in May. We contacted 78 organizations and invited over 1,000 stakeholders. In the end, so far, through those meetings and a survey, 50 souls joined in those meetings. A good representation from land management agencies, cities within the borough, local tribes, organizations, both motorized and non-motorized. I think we still have some work to do in that outreach area while we're putting together our draft. We still have to get together with agencies that haven't participated fully and get their goals and also some of their ideas around shovel-ready projects for dynamic database that I'm very excited to see roll out as a part of this process. Our snapshot of regional goals and strategies are securing, really, it breaks down to, I see it as kind of two broad categories where it's really about funding and then about people and stewardship and creating access and getting people connected to outdoor recreation, whether or not they're residents and visitors. But I think we're definitely mindful of having a good balance between creating opportunities for both and visitors. So securing funding, of course, is going to be the biggest priority. We just did an open house, the Trails and Parks Foundation, last week, and did a poll there, asking people what are their biggest barriers to creating more outdoor opportunities in the Valley and making it world-class. And it just always comes down to funding. So improving access for parks, trails, and opportunities. Maintenance is a big thing. And this is obviously coming from people like Stuart at Alaska State Parks, the superintendent for our unit. We can build a lot of big fancy things if we have the money, but it comes down to land managers being able to maintain that infrastructure. Diversifying and increasing funding sources. So, going to really expanding on those federal channels, which I think that us and organizations in the Valley have much more opportunity to tap into those funds. Providing opportunities for underrepresented user groups to participate in outdoor recreation programs, and finding ways to make sure that they're able to access close to home opportunities, not just backcountry huts in Hatcher Pass, but being able to walk out your door no matter what kind of mobility situation you're in, and being able to access the open space. I think that's one of the reasons that came out of that 9-year-old ICER and Earth Economics study, is that people moved to the Valley for outdoor recreation opportunities, and creating access for everybody is important. Installing lifelong passion and stewardship for trails, and stewarding and conserving outstanding areas in the region. So that stewardship piece, that people piece, I think if we're able to create more stewards, then it's going to make it so that we're also able to build and maintain more trails. You're getting more economic development because it's becoming, there's more political will, and the case is being made, and I think that starts to lift all boats. So the next steps for this region are, and for the core group of this working group, is to round back with the people who haven't participated. We still, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a broad public stakeholder meeting, but I think it's going to be individualized contact with folks where we need their voices to be able to round out our chapter. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Wes. Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Zelag. I'm the Executive Director for the Kenai Mountain Turning Arm National Heritage Area. And I've been facilitating the work group for what we're calling the Kenai Turning Arm region. So basically the Kenai Peninsula, and then also including the area south of Anchorage. So that would pick up Girdwood and Whittier, just to talk about that area as a holistic unit that visitors go to, that's a little bit different than the Anchorage area. And similar to Wes's outreach, we had 2 meetings. One was at the Alaska Trails Conference in April, and then a follow-up meeting with the regional work group in May. And I've summarized the discussion and goals here kind of at a high level. But there's kind of three big themes emerging. So the first is there's definitely a desire to increase capacity to build and maintain trails throughout the region, whether that's through agency staff or partners and volunteers. Just recognizing the need that there's a lot that can be built, that needs to be built, and then maintenance, year-round maintenance, or at least seasonally during the hiking season, is something that there's just a ton of needs, and a lot of capacity to meet those needs is desired. The second theme emerging from the goals is that there's a desire to increase access to new and existing trails. So not just that it's kind of the trailhead access, better amenities, better wayside accommodations, but also the type of experience that's on that trail. And so that even if there is a trail that is accessible year round, that is not choked out with annuals or pushy or something that would allow someone to experience the trail, but I really wouldn't call it accessible. And then the third is to balance, here it's really important to balance local needs with visitor demand and that economic potential, looking at the year-round uses, but also weekend demand or seasonal demand, that these are trails that locals know and love and care about. And there's a potential downside to overloving those places, especially with increased visitor demand and the environmental effect of just too much use. So we need to build our trails right and balance that local access with visitor access. Some of the strategies in order to meet these goals or emerging themes are, one strategy is to look at things like the southern trek of the Iditarod or large projects that we're already aware of, and even the smaller ones, to move those just incrementally as much as we can further along in design and in support, so that when we are ready to seek out either land water conservation funds or RTP funds or whatever the funding source might be, that they're all closer to being shovel ready than they maybe have been. So every incremental movement that we can make on each of those fronts would be helpful. It would be helpful to define a standard level of service and trail user experience for the region. So what are the expectations when you show up at a trail, even if you've heard about it, or maybe it's been written about, or it's on a map? Is there a certain standard to the amount of brushing that occurs, or the width of the trail, or how do we make trails that are accessible for all ages and all abilities seasonally, independent of where you are? And then the third is and I think this is similar to what a lot of groups have been talking about regionally and then at the state level too, is the need to identify more funding opportunities. Funding is critical to all of this. And so what can we do at the regional level to leverage those federal funds or find additional new funds? So ideas like a recreational service area or different ways to find more funding, whether it's in kind or through direct funds, through fundraising or a local tax base. So that's kind of a summary of our group. And then our next steps are as well to have a follow-up meeting with the regional work group throughout October, identify a time, and then meet that November 1 deadline to have a draft version of our chapter ready for our TCA staff to combine with the rest of the groups.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks.
Southeast, I think Michelle's up.
Kate's gonna present for us. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like maybe the formatting didn't come all the way through on the slide, so I'm gonna.
My fault. You want to share?
Yeah, I can share if you can set me up to. Let me see here.
Should be able to.
Yeah, you should be able to, Kate.
All right. Okay, can you see that now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I've had the pleasure of working with Michelle. Initially, Southeast was going to be separated into two regional groups, one for the north end and one for the south end. But we kind of decided to work together mainly because some of the issues that each community faces are very similar given our geographical landscape. And really the differences aren't necessarily separated by area of the region, but rather by small community and large community, which Southeast Alaska is generally constructed of a lot of smaller island-based communities, as some of you may know. So up to this point, we have engaged our core group throughout the state or region rather. We've had really great engagement. So just thanks to the folks that have been participating. We've been meeting pretty regularly. Even through the summer, we had a couple of meetings. Initially, we got together in April for an outreach meeting, which we focused on challenges and barriers. And then we even went so far as to do some individual outreach and follow-up. Again, just based on the fragmented landscape of Southeast Alaska, we don't necessarily have as much overlap or engagement with other agencies or communities as maybe some folks would that are on the road system. So a lot of our core group members reached out to different entities, both in the tribal realm, nonprofit, municipal, and other sectors of government. So that was super helpful. We asked them specific questions if they felt like the challenges and barriers that we had identified paralleled with those that are plaguing them at the time. We went through and refined some of the themes and goals that we established from that first April meeting, and then went back out in June for another outreach. We've had anywhere from 20 to 35 folks joining us for the meetings. And for such a small area of the state, I think we were all pretty pleased with that outcome. We continued after June to work with the core group, engaging further with individual outreach and then documenting that and following up with certain action items. And then we've begun drafting our narrative for the regional chapter, and we're continuing to refine the data and content that's in there. The next step for us will be scheduling and facilitating an October regional meeting where we'll focus primarily on projects and policies, and then weave those deliverables or highlights into the overall draft. And then of course, finalizing that for the crew by the end of October deadline. So up at the top right section here, we have a vision for Southeast Alaska and then the themes listed below. Naturally, we're seeing a lot of the same themes throughout the state, which is nice. I think in the end, though, some of the strategies in which we'll execute to deliver on those themes or goals will look a little bit different just based on the resources. So just down below, we're hoping to increase education, awareness, and funding for Indigenous stewardship, subsistence, and projects that connect our communities to the land. Second, we'd like to create better networks for planning outdoor recreation projects and marketing across the region, recognizing that smaller communities don't have the resources, funding, and expertise to do this. Third, develop training programs and opportunities across the region for outdoor recreation, construction skills, and expertise. And then 4, increase funding for projects and maintenance needs, recognizing that the high cost of construction and high match requirements and low level of resources are available. So again, hearing a lot of similarities across the different areas of the state, which is comforting in one end and also challenging on the other end. So that is what I have for you today. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Next, we have Kristen from Williams Sound.
Hi there. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I think I will run through our goals and strategies. I think they're going to sound familiar because I hear some themes cropping up for sure. So we have had a couple of meetings, just like everybody else, I haven't actually connected with a lot of outfitters and guides directly, which I'm hoping to do this fall, but their busy season was this summer, so hard to get on their radar. But we have connected with folks in Valdez and Whittier from local organizations and from municipal staff, so that's been helpful. And yeah, our goals are to foster stewardship of Prince William Sound attractions. This language will sound familiar to Chris. I can't claim it to be my own, but pursue smart collaborative ways to grow outdoor recreation opportunities that provide a high quality visitor experience, benefit residents, and steward cultural and natural resources. And this is that theme of trying to find a balance between exploiting the resource and making sure that people can have a quality experience in the way that I think we all think we know what that means. I mean, people being able to enjoy wildlife viewing and spending time outdoors in a way that isn't, I guess, disruptive to their experience. Maybe we need to talk more about how to define that. So anyway, some of the specific projects, our next goal, obviously, like everybody else, is to implement some specific projects. And what we have talked about so far, the main things we've talked about are at least a couple more public use cabins in Prince William Sound. And those would also help with putting together more infrastructure for a Prince William Sound Marine Trail, which we're talking about implementing phase one of. We're trying to pursue some EDA funding now for the first phase, which is Whittier to Valdez on the western side of the Sound. The Chute Bay Trail from Valdez to Chute Bay is, I guess, the most popular trail in the region. It's about 11 miles, I think. And the Valdez Adventure Alliance has identified that as one of their top priorities. I just mentioned the Prince William Sound Marine Trail, which would be a water trail for kayakers, other boaters, sailboats, to be able to tell people where the infrastructure is for landings and camping and shelter and mooring buoys and trails that they maybe want to get access to. So that would be the Marine Trail. And then in Whittier, they've been putting a lot of time and effort into figuring out how they can develop some recreational facilities at the head of the bay, at the head of Passage Canal, for kayakers, camping, at the Portage Pass trailhead. I think all of those things would be great recreational assets. And to do all that work, we are talking about focusing on how can we expand local capacity, how can we support local organizations in developing their capacity for initiating projects, for managing the funding, for managing the crews, doing the on-the-ground work. How can we help groups make those things happen? And these are groups like the Prince William Sound Stewardship Foundation that works out of Girdwood, and the Valdez Adventure Alliance. And I know that Dave Zastro in Cordova is really keen on getting a Friends of the Chugach group going. So these groups are in existence, and we're talking about how do we support them. And then the last goal is how can we develop either a coordinated or a centralized source of information so that people coming to the region can find information out about how to get around. Because I know there's information about the state marine parks and federal lands at the Alaska Public Lands Information Center, but that doesn't really tell you how to get from Anchorage to Whittier if you want to take the ferry to go someplace, or what about the water taxi services that are available. And I don't know that people would even know to think that there might be water taxis. So how do we provide that information in a way that is available to all and is consistent? I had thought of a centralized information source, but somebody else said, well, that might be hard to maintain. So is it a matter of making sure that everybody has access to the same information? So anyway, that's one big gap, I think, in helping people find out what's available in Prince William Sound in the way of resources and things they can do. So those are our goals and some of our strategies.
Thanks, Kristen. Clay.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and thanks to the whole group here. Is great stuff. So I'm Clay Walker, the mayor of the Denali Borough, serving as a group facilitator for the Denali Region Working Group. And we do have a really good broad membership in our working group, from corporate partners here to nonprofit partners, including the chamber, state agencies, DOT, DNR are in the working group, and of course federal agencies too, and primarily the National Park Service. Really do appreciate Michael's help and support along the way. We had some really good meetings in April, May. And yeah, through the busy summer, haven't met as much, but look forward to getting back to it and fine tuning the work that we've already done. Michael's been so gracious to prepare a good slide for me here, and let's go through that in terms of our goals to expand recreation opportunities in the front country, which is really more important in a not too distant world where, and actually behind us world, where the park road may be closed at some point further out due to landslide issues. So really important to have a great array of front country activities for both visitors and residents. And I love those projects where we hit both marks, and we've been finding those of late. So expand the regional funding sources. Boy, we've been successful with some grant opportunities of late under the Federal Land Access Program. We did just complete a new trailhead at Antler Creek on the north side of the park, outside the national park. There's a new hiking trailhead that's really exciting for, again, residents and visitors to the area. And we're looking forward to phase 2 for that funding source as well, to expand that trail and provide some additional services there, including restrooms. And then, so these are our goals going through it: expand outdoor recreation opportunities, expand regional funding sources, and that's inclusive of looking at the maintenance and operations piece as well. And then update and implement existing plans and develop new regional plans where needed. And we do see needs there in terms of additional trail planning, and investing in outdoor recreation opportunities at the community scale, incorporating youth and youth-friendly outdoor recreation infrastructure, always popular and important here. And enhance the stewardship of the borough through good planning. And the collaboration is the key, and that's where we've seen successes, is in this collaboration and building our partnerships. And for that, I'm thankful to be part of the SCORP and Denali having its own region, which is kind of new this time. And it really helps us build these partnerships that are going to be the key to our success going forward. So I want to let the group know that I do have a new, in terms of building capacity, I do have an assistant that'll be coming on board and will be helping in the SCORP world. And her name's Teresa Floberg. You may see her in future meetings. And some of those of you in the visitor industry may be familiar with her. And she's served as marketing director and also a GM in the area. So look forward to having her on board and building our capacities that way. So so that's what I wanted to share, and I'd be happy to hand it off to Michael if he has anything additional to add. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mayor Walker. Appreciate you. Excited about the $1 million that we got for the Antler Ridge Trailhead and Trail, and the future possibilities there. Fairbanks.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Brian Wright. I'm the Trails Coordinator at Fairbanks North Star Borough Parks and Recs. I've been serving as the coordinator for the Fairbanks and Interior project. First off, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So one of the themes that was coming up overall with our stakeholder group was really kind of the need for a vision There are a bunch of different agencies, bunch of different organizations, nonprofits, and user groups, all kind of going in their own directions. And we were hoping to get some more direction for a vision for this area, so that when resources are available, or when we have the opportunity to go for them, we can all be going in the same direction, and knowing which projects or ideas or goals are most important. Something that came up that appears to be similar across other regions is the desire to invite people to our area, make it a destination, a recreation destination, simultaneously a great place to live, but also a great place to visit. And to do that, we are looking to understand and highlight the things that makes our area unique and special. So some projects or strategies, concepts that came up regarding that as improving access to the Chena River, access along the Chena River, improving the parks and playgrounds that are around the Chena River that get people involved in that excellent feature of our town in Fairbanks. In particular, improving our Riverside Park and Playground complex. That includes Pioneer Park, our Carlson Center, a bike path, and several playgrounds and boat launches along the river. In particular, the need for a major playground renovation at Pioneer Park. We also wanted to focus on the kind of special connections that we have throughout town provided via trails going through different neighborhoods and connecting our residents, our various communities to the wildlands in their back doors. So we're hoping to continue to improve trailheads, develop trailheads so that these places are inviting to everybody, either residents who aren't very familiar with them or visitors, so that you can be driving through town and see that there are places to go. Also looking to kind of tap into some of these landscapes that are special, but a bit more remote and not particularly accessible to folks who don't have a ton of experience. So some of the more distant destinations, hot springs, kind of in the bush, and longer river trips that could be supported by a better or improved system of public use cabins. And then also a concept of being able to traverse the Eastern Alaska range. That's that Earth project that's listed there. So better access across rivers so that people can safely access the mountains that they live close to. A major theme was improving access for everyone, all ages, all abilities, and in particular up here during all seasons. We have a very extreme climate change as we do all over the state. It seems the farther north you go, it gets quite difficult to keep people outdoors or active in the winter. And so one of the things that kept coming up was if we want people to continue to engage in outdoor recreation and stay active and stay healthy, then we actually need some indoor support too. We need shelters to help people do their winter outdoor activities and be able to warm up. And then for the folks who aren't able to go on ungroomed or even groomed trails, we need some indoor spaces to keep their fitness going so that they're ready to enjoy the outdoors in the summer. And then also having the capacity to then address the summer boom in use where we have that short but extremely intense season of use with very little time or capacity to keep up with the maintenance before things freeze again. One project concept that has been coming up is a park a year capital investment, particularly focused on ADA accessibility upgrades, making sure that all the little parks in town get those upgrades and maintain compliance. Stewardship is a common theme throughout many of the goals that we had, and so it's starting to kind of emerge as its own thing. We do want to improve our ability to glean what we can from volunteer support, but we also recognize that if we want volunteer help, we need to be supporting them and figuring out ways to streamline their access and involvement in our parks and trail facilities. Also improving education and wayfinding on site so that the community can better access the park and rec facilities and understand their value and what they're being used for. Around all of these, we've found that there's a great need in this area, and it sounds like all over the state, for better planning. We still need to better understand community needs, and we're getting some of that through the SCORP. We're getting some of that through some ongoing parks and rec plans in the borough and also on federal lands nearby. But we're still missing some of those efforts to really crystallize a local vision for our community parks and rec in Fairbanks. And then, having better ways to prioritize capital projects. Of course, we'll get some of that from this SCORP, but all of our communities in the interior do need those focus efforts in their own neck of the woods. And then for the plans that we do have, like any good plan, it recommends more planning. And for many of our existing plans, that's only as far as we've gotten. So there are many recommendations to pursue, design work so that we can move forward with construction in different parks or recreation areas. And so we're finding that is still a major need around. So we'll move forward with some of these themes, chase down more strategies and projects for each goal, and take care of that over the next month so that we have a bit of a draft together. That's where we're at.
Thanks, Brian. So Lizzie, Dean, and Morgan have been doing a lot of work with the rural groups, and we have not been super successful to this point, but we continue to reach out and have conversations with several different folks. We haven't necessarily found somebody or some group that wants to champion the template, and we're starting to think that it's probably going to look a lot different. So one of the things we started to do, starting to pull other goals from existing plans to identify potential projects, and through conversations that we've had. We've had lots of meetings with different folks to get advice, and the metrics of success may be reframed by developing those relationships, starting those, trying to let folks know the relevance of the SCORP process and how it may help their region, but us not telling them that, right? So having discussions about how that should work, and that it may start to identify some inequities in the process and limitations in accessing those funds. Like, where do you come up with the match? Which I'm going to ask the group here in a minute, like how do we come up with the match? So LWCF sounds great, but it has a 50% match. If you're a small rural community in McGrath, Alaska, and you want a $500,000 project, where's that $250,000 going to come from? Reframing and redefining outdoor recreation to be relevant to Alaska Native communities. All my discussions with several folks now has been, well, outdoor recreation isn't exactly what you call it out here. And I very much believe that and want to work with those groups for them to define their own outdoor recreation. And then some of the groups have told us that there's a lack of representation from Alaska Native communities on the ORTAB. So just starting to have those conversations, continuing those conversations, and not giving up on this, even though it's not going to probably look like the other regions. So that is all the regional presentations. And I want to especially thank each one of those regions for bringing together more people than I think the outdoor, than the SCORP has ever done in the history of the SCORP in Alaska. So the fact that you might have 20 folks in a region, 30 folks in another region, all helping and talking about the SCORP, to me is a huge win already, and really appreciate all the free time that each one of the facilitators and the core group that they brought together has been doing. So because we didn't get a whole lot of jump in last time, I got some questions that me and Chris were thinking about while the presentations were going. And I'm going to start off with, what are your thoughts on the goals? So at the beginning, I sort of shared that we were starting to think about taking the goals from each region and where it made sense to make them statewide goals. Kind of like to hear from the regional people on what they think about that. If we should just leave their stuff alone as to not mess up their regional perspective, or if it does make sense in some cases where we continue to kind of say the same thing to make those statewide goals. So if any one of the regional people wants to jump in with their thoughts on that, I think it'll be helpful going forward.
This is Jessica. I do feel pretty strongly as a regional facilitator that when there are so many reoccurring themes across the board in the different regions, that it would be helpful to align a few of those and roll them up to the state level, just to make sure then that we're putting our best foot forward on maybe 2 or 3, and then that provides this opportunity to then add additional goals for each region that are really locally specific, so that we're mapping across the board on a few, and then can get more nuanced in our chapters when it makes sense. That's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah, and this is Clay in the Denali region. I'd agree with that, Jessica, and thanks for that. And yeah, I mean, expanding outdoor recreation opportunities is our #1, and that's definitely a statewide goal. So yeah, I say roll it on up. Thanks.
With Southeast, yeah, I agree with everything that was said. Just in terms of Southeast, we still need more time. We're still analyzing, refining before we start extracting things, but give us about a month. I think that would be good. Thank you.
Yes, my 2 cents is it seems like we ought to aim to kind of have our cake and eat it too. I mean, I think having some uniformity to the goals where people are really trying to express the same idea, you know, where we can use the same language, that seems helpful. But it also seems just really critical that the distinct characteristics and words that are coming out even through this discussion, unique to individual regions, that we capture those too. So I think it's worth thinking about how we don't want people reading through it saying, well, I don't need to read the next chapter because I read the previous chapter because they're all the same. So I think just making sure, and I see a note, looks like from Ben, about context, that we structure these individual regional chapters so they really bring out the things that are both common statewide and unique to the region. And maybe that's just in the strategies that fall under some of those goals, like a specific local funding strategy or a specific local stewardship strategy.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. I think it's at the strategy level where we'll get a lot from the individual groups. At the goal level, they seem consistent enough that it would really help having less to wade through to have consistent language for each similar goal. And then at the regional level, identify, well, how is Southeast going to have a different strategy, you know, to meet that goal, as you know, the way they see it, the way it means to them versus, you know, in the northern regions, what different strategies are we going to have, or different projects that we would have to implement. And, you know, depending on what priority a different goal is, one region may have a lot of different strategies under one goal, or a lot of big projects under one and not a lot in the other. And another region might not be as interested in one goal. And so that seems like the strategies are where we'll get really specific.
Okay, that was very helpful. The last thing Chris and I want to do is take the work that the regions have been doing and make you guys mad by changing it drastically. So I'm hearing the strategies and the context. So we will be working with you, I think, to make sure that we don't screw those up. Next one is another sort of local regional thing, but how to increase local funding for federal match. So I've been listening to all the regions, Chris focus in on this as well, but are there particular strategies that you can think of in your region that might be helpful to figure out how we raise the match for especially federal funding that's out there? And if your region has a strategy for that already and would like to share it, that would be great.
And
This
maybe
is
I can,
Kristen. Oh,
go ahead, Lee.
Go ahead, Kristen.
oh, I don't have a specific strategy, but I have been thinking about I guess wanted to see what others thought about the recreation trail program and how they have been making it progressively harder to qualify and to be able to manage funds. And I don't know if there's anything we can do as a group to say, you know, they're really working hard to screen people out, you know, like you have to fund an entire project out of pocket before they'll only reimburse you once, I think is my understanding, which isn't the way it used to be. And their record keeping practices are way more onerous than most granting agencies. And this doesn't really answer your question, but I was just like an audience that I thought might be sympathetic, and I wanted to vent it and see what others thought about that. And I do appreciate the work that, I mean, the listing that Chris put together with all those different sources, because I feel like we haven't, or at least to my knowledge, the smaller groups around the state probably haven't, I should just speak for Cordova, but we have not been able to tap into things like those Dingle Johnson funds and some of those other funding pots that take a little bit more, or I don't know, that seem to be managed a little bit closer to the vest. And so anything that we can do, I think, as a group to help each other figure out how to get into their system. The Dingle Johnson stuff, I don't know if you have to know somebody that knows somebody, or somehow you have to get your project on a list through Fish and Game, and it's their systems are a little opaque. And so anything that we can do to shed a little bit more light on how to access those would be helpful.
So Ben or Ricky, not to put you on the spot, but do either one of you want to talk about the RTP or the Fish and Wildlife funding? Ben, it looks like you're off mute. Go ahead.
So, I mean, you have to submit your project for us to consider, because it goes through our process. I'm trying to find the links to the pages that I can put in the comments right now, but we have pages where it describes what to do and when to get stuff done, I'm pretty sure. So I just need to find that. The reason it's kind of ratcheted down a little more is there's specific requirements on that money, maybe more so than other sources. But that works. I mean, that's boating access, and that's also just trail access. But you've got to remember, those PR and DJ money has to have a strong sport fishing nexus or a hunting nexus, or you don't qualify. This can't be for just general outdoor recreation.
Thank you.
Ricky?
Yeah, related to the RTP type stuff, I definitely understand where people are coming from on the granting requirements. However, you know, both the Land Water Conservation Fund and the RTP program are federal grant programs. And while things may have been different in the past, we have been, as the state, have been getting a lot of feedback from the federal grantees who are doing the grants and to get into compliance with federal grants. So that is a process that's been happening. One of the things that we did lose in a prior round of cuts, basically when I came on board as the director here, was the state trail program, which did a lot of outreach in coaching communities and people of how to apply for federal grants. That position no longer exists within Parks and Outdoor Recreation for the state. If we could have something coming out of the SCORP, I think would be very beneficial, is to figure out how to get that training program back up on step, and maybe that's something we can embed either in the ATIA fall program or maybe in the spring Alaska Trails Conference. But there is definitely a need to coach people on how to apply for, federal grants, and it's something that I've looked at as a priority. But we don't even have a state grant administrator for land water conservation still. We're out to hire for that position, so it's difficult to put programs in place when you don't have people to fulfill that mission. So we're still waiting for the SCORP help, but that's definitely something that I think is a priority, and we don't have the capacity to do that, but I think it's something that we need to identify and build into the SCORP, that we do need help applying for federal grants. And I would actually like to see, some sort of wholesale change in them to become block grants, which just come to the state and then we divvy out and don't have to deal with the federal requirements. That's something that I brought up with the National Association of State Park Directors that I was just at. And, everybody's on the same page doing that, because it seems like the state park grant administrators for RTP and LWCF and FLAP grants get in the crosshairs between the federal requirements and then the people applying for grants. And so everybody had that. Everybody's looking for money. The amount of money federal match, unlike the kind of PR and Diggle Johnson monies for sport fishing and outdoor and for hunting, it's just not there for the rest of the outdoor recreation users. And so there was near unanimous consent at the state park directors level of that. We need a national discussion on relooking at why users for outdoor recreation aren't contributing like hunters and anglers. So.
I might just add, Kristen, to what you'd said. You're far from the first person to feel at times a bit of frustration about trying to get through that process. And I think Ricky's correct in saying a lot of that frustration is outside of the immediate control of the state. It comes down through some of the rules federal highways and others require. But I think Ricky's saying, and there've been a bunch of discussions around the fact that it probably could be a better process and easier for the state and easier for applicants. So one of the items in that funding list that I blasted through quickly is to do just that, is to work with the state, work with federal highways, wherever the right control sits, to see if we can make that system. Mike always says we want to get the money on the ground and reduce the friction in the pipeline from the opportunity to something physically happening. So I think it'll be one we'll be talking about more, a real priority, I think, in the whole SCORP process.
There is one more thing I wanted to add to your list of funding sources. I don't think it was on there, but the Forest Service's Title II Secure Rural Schools money, there are committees around different parts of I guess mostly that, where there are national forests, but that's funding that local groups can be tapping into for trails and stuff that are,
Any other thoughts about how to increase local funding, especially that federal match? Any other?
Mike, you'd asked for examples, and I'll lean in, maybe Wes can add detail, but in the Mat-Su Borough, there's now a Talkeetna Special Use District that was created because of the need to deal with the limitations of the septic sewer system in downtown Talkeetna that was very much impacted by the rapid growth in that area. So there's now a locally based special use district that takes an increment, in this case of sales tax, and funnels that back in at the local level to help maintain and improve that specific piece of infrastructure. That same model can use sales tax or property tax in any organized borough of the state. And what that potentially does is it means that as the demand grows, then you have more money to meet the demand. So I endlessly wave this flag of the Alaska disconnect, but finding ways so that there's just a hardwired connection between more use equals more money. And I think Alaska generally not enthused about paying taxes, but people are also not enthused about feeling overrun. So that's a successful example in Anchorage, in the Matsu, and the other one is the Anchorage sustained success in doing annual bond measures. It requires people to pay for some things. It requires a small increment of increased property tax, but it's generated like $30 million in the last 15, 20 years. So worth pushing for local funding sources that can be used then to leverage these bigger federal sums.
If I could jump in just for a second too. Also, two other things happening, I think, are if the infrastructure bill goes forward with the surface transportation, there's going to be more money coming into the state through DOT. And I think people need to be aware of engaging at your regional STIPs. So if there's areas where we want access, better roads to an area, walkways, bridges, trailheads, that's going to be something coming, I think, in the next 5 years. That's going to be a new opportunity for funding, but to engage at that regional DOT level they're going to be, I think, almost a 50 or 60% increase in their base funding levels through the new federal highways bill. So that's something to pay attention to for everyone. And then the other thing that we brought up at the national level that I brought up is that, Alaska has close to half the tribal entities in the country, and there is not equity for funding for outdoor recreation for tribes. And, we're on par with, America Samoa and the amount of land water conservation fund monies we get nationally. Plus, we have half the tribes, and the tribes are supposed to get their monies through land water conservation fund. That is an inequitable distribution of funding. And that's something that I think needs to be embedded in our SCORP as an issue when we talk about equity, in terms of tribes not having access to kind of traditional sources of outdoor recreation.
Wes, did you want to follow up on what Chris said?
I don't know about that special use area in Talkeetna, but I was going to say, coming from the perspective of a public charity, a public foundation, while there's, there's the federal channels of money and bond measures, the Matsu is going to be taking one up for a road bond that's going to have a lot of multimodal options possibly, but the assembly won't be adding how that is going to be paid for currently. So that question is going to go to voters, but unsure how it's going to happen. So in an area here where everybody's pretty fiscally conservative, and the taxes, the word tax is just like kind of a non-starter. I think we really, as organizations and agency partners, just have to know that fundraising and working with individuals and corporations to help pay for infrastructure is a totally renewable resource. And while it may not have the same scale as some of these other funding options, it means that you're telling the story of what you're doing impactfully, and you're making people passionate who are using the trails, using the resources, and that inflow is always going to be there. Because if you're doing this fundraising piece for public infrastructure and programs around outdoor recreation, is this equation works for this sector, it works for the social services sector. Everybody is doing it to different levels of sophistication and competency, but I think we have an opportunity there to be, even better fundraisers. I know, speaking from our foundation, that's one thing that we're trying to do better, is to make sure that we're finding ways for, if people want to know how they can give back to these trails, finding ways to make those donations flow in. So that's one way you're going to help build up that match.
Thanks, Wes. So I'm going to attempt to get some other voices in the room. And one question to think about, but respond however you want to anything you've heard. How do you see the SCORP fitting into your organization? What use would it be to you? Could you use it as an advocacy tool? But feel free to share whatever. I just want to get some folks in who have not said anything in the room. So Eric, not to put you on the spot, but if you got anything to share, now's your time. Feel free to pass though. And Eric, if you're trying to talk, you're on mute. If not, I'll take that as a pass and go to the next person. All right, how about Dan? Are you with us, Dan?
I'm here, yeah. Thank you guys. I've just been listening. We had an extraordinarily busy summer, so I haven't been able to participate to the degree that I was hoping to, but yeah, I hear really good things. I'm really encouraged. Obviously, you know, for my organization as a small business holder, the more investment we can make in sort of public lands and infrastructure, the better it is from an independent travel standpoint. So the more we can do to encourage independent travelers to come to Alaska and provide opportunities for them to be able to enjoy our great landscapes in a way that is you know, allows access, allows you know, places for people to camp and to hike and to experience Alaska's great outdoors, the better. So thank you, appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dan. I also invited Mindy from Delta Junction Trails Association. And so Mindy, if you want to comment on anything you heard or share something, feel free to do so.
Sure. We're here in Delta Junction, and we're a community without a tax base at all, and we're not even in a county. We do have a city government that encompasses about 15 miles around the core of the city. And so we have a lot of folks in the outlying area. And so we've been successful in receiving grants and assistance to 3 trail projects in our area. And so now our task is to maintain these beautiful facilities and sites. And that's a difficult thing to do, but I agree with others, and building strong relationships with entities in your region is vital. And we've learned not to ask for too much until we really need it. And it's been working really well, but we need to be able to rally the young troops too, because our aging population is not capable of doing the maintenance on these trails that is necessary. So forestry's been helping us, and we're trying to get youth groups involved, but it is an ongoing deal. Funding is always a problem. And I think that what I've heard today captures the concepts that we do need to sit at the table with our city government and tell them what's important throughout the state and what could be the visions in our community that are currently not happening. So thank you all for collecting so many wonderful thoughts and ideas. And I think the broad concept of some of those within the state would be really valuable. And then we tweak it with our individual needs. So yes, thank you.
Thanks, Mindy. Amanda, did you want to share anything? If so, you're on mute. If not, I will go to the next person. Okay, change your mind, we'll come back around. Jeff Samuels from ATIA. Also might be on mute, Jeff.
Sure. So, yeah, I know that ATI will have there's a lot of connection for outdoor recreation and promotion of outdoor recreation with the SCORP, and I'll let sort of Sarah speak more broadly to that when she's on here next time. But I have a couple of thoughts around themes. One is the theme that Lee was talking about with workforce development and that project, and engaging young people in trail development and trail maintenance, and what Wes Hoskins regional group had to say about that passion, instilling that lifelong passion for trails and for stewardship of those trails. And those two are definitely connected. Young people who participate in core type programs, conservation core programs, definitely become lifelong stewards of those trails that they develop, and every other trail that they travel on over their lives. So I think there's a common thread to be woven here between getting youth interested and paid to get out and do work on trails and become stewards, become sort of youth stewards in their communities for trail development, and then using them to be sort of the roots of a broader movement of the public that becomes more invested and more engaged in finding ways to keep those trails maintained. The conversation we had in the last couple of weeks at a couple of meetings was around sort of the surge of funding that comes down the pike every now and then, and trying to make that surge more consistent. And those are topics that have been discussed here today. The tax word is a tricky one in Alaska in particular, but for years, the state economy has been able to sustain, trail development and maintenance. And in the last 5 years, that funding has just really dropped off, and it needs to be replaced by something other than just, CARES Act or ARPA or other, sort of emergency pots of money that are coming from the federal government, but to be sustained in a long-term way that will keep these trails maintained, trailheads maintained, bathrooms cleaned, things like that for years to come. And that's the crux of the problem here. And there've been some solutions discussed, and yeah, I'm just curious to keep hearing this conversation continue. So thanks for allowing me to be here today.
Thanks, Jeff. Zach from Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon. I don't really have much to add. I just wanted to say thanks for putting all this together. I think there's some great ideas. Like some of the other people have commented, it's been a pretty hectic summer, but I anticipate having a bit more time to involve in this and look forward to developing this. So just thanks again for putting this together and bringing us all to the table.
Thanks, Zach. Melissa from ASLA.
Hi. I guess maybe I'll just address your question earlier, if that's all right, Michael, about the conservation question. I would support not removing conservation from the central themes of this document. I think that in Alaska, we do tend to just take conservation and conserved lands for granted, because our conservation history is a bit different from a lot of the rest of the United States, and especially back east where the LWCF is administered. But that doesn't mean we should ignore it, especially as new and different ways to conserve habitat and lands are developed. We don't want to miss out on those opportunities, and we also don't want to alienate traditional groups, like I was saying in my chat comment, traditional groups like Ducks Unlimited or the Audubon Society, who are very conservation focused as well. And just also based on our language about recreation, we want to be careful about encompassing a wide group of users, hunters, as well as the more contemporary like climbers and trail users. And I think that pretty much sums up my comment. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Appreciate that. Stuart from Denali State Park.
I'm just here listening. I'm not going to add additional comments at this time.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Appreciate you being here. Ed Fogels, anything to share?
Yeah, it's been a great discussion and a lot of good ideas, and I mean they're all great, and I second all of them. You know, from my perspective on the Kenai River Sport Fishing Association, I chair the habitat.
I might have lost you, Ed. Could just be me though.
Yeah, your voice dropped out, Ed.
Well, Ed, if you get it to work, we'll come back around to you. Matt Steffi.
Hey there. Thanks for putting this all together. And I don't have a whole lot to offer, except that I'm seeing a lot of consistency in this message of, you know, the economic impacts of the industry and how we need to keep that in mind, and how, as was said earlier, the concept of spending money to make money. I know that this whole concept of trying to be able to accurately demonstrate to our elected officials and decision makers what the economic value of this type of infrastructure is, I think is a really important tool. And it's nice to see a lot of people moving towards that same direction.
Matt, can you introduce yourself a little bit? I'm not sure you've been on a call before, so.
Okay, certainly. I'm Matt Steffi. I'm the superintendent of parks with the city of Homer. And I've been down here for a number of years. I also worked in the Fairbanks North Starborough Parks Department and over in the city of Valdez for a number of years. And I've been with the State Alaska Recreation and Parks Association for almost 20 years now.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to have you in this conversation then.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Is there anybody that did not get a chance to speak that would like to say something? All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm not going to push us till 2. I feel like everybody got their voice. We had really good presentations. I think there's a lot here in the chat for myself and Alaska Trails to go over. So if no parting words, Chris Beck?
I guess I would just be curious, a question. We're just seeing specifically in Anchorage, a tension between two reasonable goals. One is building more capacity, building more trails, more trailheads, and then folks who are maybe been users of those areas being unenthused about that change. And I just wonder what advice the group might have. Doesn't have to all be now, but over the completion of the SCORP of how we find the balance point between responding to the need and probably, you know, the opportunity and the need for growth, and at the same time doing well by existing residents, many of whom are only moderately enthused about the idea, or even actually flat out opposed to the idea of much growth. Not an easy topic.
Great conversations today. I think we have a lot of material. I think really excited by the progress at the regional level and the statewide level. I wanted to throw something out there for people in terms of communication about what we're doing with the SCORP here. We just got an invite for the Alaska Recreation and Park Association on October 6th here at the Soldotna Sports Center on the Kenai Peninsula. And we're gonna do a little presentation about, we've been asked to do a presentation on the SCORP and provide an update. If other folks this fall, we'll start getting back fall and winter into the kind of meeting cycle. If you think there's a window or an appropriate link to the SCORP, please reach out to Mike and myself, and we will see if we can get a speaker there and talk about our efforts, ongoing efforts for the SCORP.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out and supporting this project, especially the facilitators for the groups. I appreciate all of you. We will see you. Oh, next steps. For those who didn't leave. Set the next meeting for October 25th. It'll be at the same exact time. We want to wrap up drafts by November 1. Writing starts in November. Will continue to happen even though new information is coming in. And then I think future information from the SWAG will help analyze some of this data that we're excited about possibly getting. So thank you all, and I will see you next time.
Thanks so much for coordinating, Mike. This is great.
You bet.
Yeah, good job, Mike. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.